Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Intro to Tech Equity webinar. We'll get started in a few moments just to let the room fill in a little. So just hang tight and we'll get started shortly. Thank you. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Intro to Tech Equity webinar. We're going to wait a few more minutes just to let the room fill in a little and we'll get started shortly. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our Intro to Tech Equity webinar. I hope you all can hear and see me. My name is Herman Calderon. I'm the community manager at TechEquity Collaborative. In my role, I get to engage with some of our supporters and members through events such as these and volunteer opportunities that we host. Feel free to drop in any questions you have throughout the presentation into the Q&A box on the bottom of your screens, but we won't get to those until the end. And then anything on the chat for any comments you'd like to make. So a little bit about what we'll be talking about today. We'll talk about why Tech Equity exists as an organization and how we got started. We'll talk about the key issues we have identified to help us better understand the problems that need to be solved. And we'll talk about how we can take action to address our region's most pressing economic issues. But before moving on with the conversation about tech equity, I wanted to acknowledge that we're hosting this webinar during very tough times and particularly tough for Black people in the US. And as an organization, we've discussed how to best respond to the situation, including changing or canceling some of our upcoming events. But we felt like it's important for us that when thinking of issues like police violence and police brutality, that we also address issues that are larger structural racial inequities within our economic systems that are withholding and supporting a police state. So we want to continue hosting these conversations such as these, but also provide space to talk about structural racial inequities. And I encourage you all to support organizations that are on the ground, organizing just as much as organizations that are responding to the racial inequities within our economy. And as an organization, we released a statement, which you can find on our website. And we've included ways in which you can step up and organizations that you can support if you're able to. So why are we here? Well, TechEquity got started because some of its earliest founders and members saw the symptoms of growing inequity within their neighborhoods. And they noticed that there was a perception in the community that tech workers were the cause of the problem of these inequities. They noticed things such as rising rents, displacement, increases in traffic, and people experiencing homelessness. And as they talked to others, they realized that they weren't alone in their concerns and that they, as tech workers, were uniquely positioned to help contribute to solutions that would address these issues. Especially now in the face of the pandemic, we're seeing that the affordability crisis we're in gets so much worse with an increased burden on lower income people and communities of color. And many of our neighbors are uncertain as to how they'll continue to manage what was already an untenable situation. At the same time, tech workers have been relatively unscathed. So the pandemic we're in has the potential to even further exacerbate some of these inequalities that our region is already facing. So this is the state of our housing crisis in the Bay Area. I think the fact that rents are rising really isn't a surprise to anyone on this call because we already know and feel this. And while some Californians are very successful in this tech-driven economy here, the average salaries for tenants have actually decreased slightly. And it really is a sharp contrast with the narrative of tech success. And without tech at the table to work together to address our shared crisis, it's understandable as to why community members are frustrated. Just before the pandemic, unemployment was hovering around the 4% mark, and people were already struggling to make ends meet. Since the virus hit, 1.6 million Californians have filed for unemployment. Meanwhile, experts believe that it's not likely that rents will fall much during this economic downturn. Rents may go down eventually, but are more likely to flatline, and people's incomes won't rebound quickly enough. So renters will actually be in a worse position overall. And as instability and uncertainty continues, we'll see more of our neighbors being pushed out into homelessness or worse. And as I mentioned, community members are frustrated. And considering the graph we just looked at, it really comes to no surprise. I know for myself, growing up in the Bay Area my whole life, I've been able to see both sides of the coin. I have friends and family who are worried about the changes in their communities and what that means for them, but I also have friends and family who have pursued jobs within the tech industry and have found lots of success. However, we see that when tech shoulders the blame for our region's issues, it really creates a us versus them dynamic that further divides our communities. And we know that tech workers care and that they want to help and that they don't want to be a part of this deepening divide within our region. And while at the same time, we're all unsure as to how long we'll be managing this new normal caused by the pandemic, it's important that to note that many in the tech sector remain relatively unscathed. More than most other sectors within the job market, tech really has been able to make the transition to working from home with little disruption. And now more than ever, tech workers and tech companies have an opportunity to support more equitable solutions in our communities. We have an opportunity to use our unique positions of privilege to support our neighbors, but it can be hard to know how to best engage in a time of such uncertainty. Because of our affordability crisis, which is now compounded by the pandemic, we're at risk of losing so many critical components in our community that make the Bay Area a hub of diversity and innovation. Over the last few decades, housing costs have skyrocketed due in part to limited supply. And the housing crisis was already incredibly challenging for many families prior to COVID-19. And now, as thousands are filing for unemployment weekly, already unaffordable rents are near impossible to meet. As a result, we've seen longtime residents that are being forced out, and we've seen how difficult it is for lower and middle income people to be able to live near the jobs where they work. While some workers are finding success, many others are struggling to make ends meet. And families that were already challenged by the status quo are now finding themselves unable to weather this new crisis, the pandemic. But we don't think that it has to be this way. We're as optimistic as ever about the tech industry's potential to drive broad-based growth that's accessible to everyone, but it's clear that it won't happen on its own. We can make it out of this crisis stronger than we were before, but only if we invest in the people and the institutions that are serving our communities. We have to show up, and we have to do so in partnership with those in the community that are feeling the most pain if we're ever to dismantle this notion that tech is the enemy. We believe that a more engaged tech sector is a more ethical tech sector, that connecting tech workers and companies to issues where they live in will result in more ethical decisions at work and more engagement within our communities. We know we can do this, and the first step is to show up. And you all have done a great first step by signing on to this webinar and joining in on the conversation. Our goal at TechEquity is to change the conditions in which the tech sector is growing. We believe that effective structural change will eliminate a culture and policies that have institutionalized inequity, leading to stronger and more resilient communities. We help tech workers approach these big problems and engage in the system change in three major ways. So our programs educate you about the most critical civic issues where you live, and we do that through a variety of ways, including book club discussions with authors, panel discussions with experts, webinars such as these, and voter guides that we release. We activate you on a policy advocacy agenda that results in a more inclusive economy in your community through some of our participation, such as voter turnout, signature gathering, and lobbying. And finally, we connect you on a personal level to the community you live in and the people who live there outside of your tech bubble through our programming and campaigns that we participate in. The good news is that members at TechEquity are showing up for the community. Tech workers are members of the community and should be at the table working alongside non-tech community members. Together, we can advocate for our most pressing shared problems. The pandemic has shown us that the health of our community depends on all of us, and we have to work together to address these underlying issues that are driving inequity within our tech economy. Our two issue areas that we focus on at TechEquity are housing and workforce and labor. And while housing are really a core part of our issues here, these two issues really are intertwined, intersect, and cross each other's paths in many ways. Because where you live affects where your access to opportunity is, and what job you have affects where you're able to afford to live. So our goal is bold, comprehensive change by companies and government that's led by the tech workforce. And these issues have only gotten more urgent in the face of the pandemic, but we're all well positioned to adapt our agenda to these new realities. So let's learn a little bit more about inequity within our neighborhoods. The affordability crisis really is decades in the making. The policy choices we've made over the course of decades have set us up for this level of pain our community is feeling now during the pandemic. In the 1930s, the federal government instituted a policy that's still felt today, especially within communities of color, and that policy is redlining. So redlining was a process in which the Homeowners Loan Corporation, a federal agency, gave neighborhoods ratings to guide investment. And the policy is named for the red or hazardous neighborhoods that were deemed riskiest. So on maps, those neighborhoods were literally redlined, as we can see with the image on the screen. And those communities that were deemed risky for investment or redlined didn't receive any investment. And these neighborhoods were predominantly home to communities of color, and that really is by no accident. The hazardous ratings were in large part based on racial demographics. So in other words, redlining was a discriminatory and a racist policy. It made it hard for residents to get loans for home ownership or get loans for maintenance of their homes for things like something like building a new roof. And consequently, redlining led to cycles of disinvestment, including development and production within these neighborhoods. So there's a terrible history of underinvestment, underbuilding, and exclusion in the Bay Area. And often those communities that have been historically underinvested and have been redlined are the same communities that are at risk of gentrification today. And the crisis that we're living in really is decades in the making, way before tech started. And it's not unique to the Bay Area. There are many cases of redlining all across the Bay, all across California, and all across the United States. So by preventing entire neighborhoods from being able to access capital, these neighborhoods were unable to build the schools they needed, small businesses, and a community that really fostered success and opportunity. And it caused many of the people who have lived in redline neighborhoods for generations to fall in and stay in liquid asset poverty. Now, you may be asking yourselves, what is liquid asset poverty? Well, someone is considered to be in liquid asset poverty if they don't have enough savings to cover their basic expenses for 3 months after experiencing an income shock. And an income shock can be a huge rent increase, a sudden loss of a job, or the pandemic, for example. And this impacts almost 1 out of 2 Californians. So 46% of Californians are in liquid asset poverty, and people of color and lower income people are affected at much higher rates. So 67% of Latino households are in liquid asset poverty, and 63% of African American households are in liquid asset poverty. And there really isn't a single reason as to why all of this is happening. Many years of policy decisions have led to these outcomes, which are especially burdensome for communities of color. And these policies often predate tech's arrival, but tech workers can now take a role in supporting better policies moving forward. The twin forces of a housing shortage, particularly with affordable housing and wages that don't cover the cost of living, have created a regional crisis that has hindered opportunity, growth, and prosperity for families and businesses alike. And as you can imagine, these statistics will likely be impacted by the outcome of the virus. And many people in our communities were already struggling. So with unemployment on a steep rise and city and state budgets that are being depleted by emergency response efforts, many of our neighbors are facing increased instability and likely will for years to come if we don't implement the necessary solutions now. So the cost of living here were already high. So let's take a look at what a worker earning minimum wage fares in the current rental market. So this is what it takes to afford the average 2-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. So if you're making $120,000 a year, you can afford the average 2-bedroom apartment working a normal, regular 8-hour day, 8-hour shift. However, if you're making minimum wage in San Francisco, you need to work 30 hours a day to be able to afford that 2-bedroom. So there's only 24 hours in a day. So we're actually setting up an impossible situation for low wage workers to be able to afford to live in the city where they work. And just to keep it in context, it's not just people outside the tech sector that are struggling to afford San Francisco. There's a common misconception that all tech workers are paid lavish salaries. However, not every salaried employee is making 6 figures. Some salaried tech employees, like those in customer success or marketing, are paid salaries that are still considered to be low income within the Bay Area. And even further away from this image of a wealthy tech worker are the thousands of contractors and contingent workers like security guards, custodians, cooks, bus drivers who are working long hours to maintain tech companies, but are receiving minimum benefits and are not paid as much. So you have to have a good salary to afford your apartment, but why is your apartment so expensive to begin with? Well, rents are going up due in part to lack of supply. And this chart is showing us what we should be building. So the state sets goals for how much housing local communities should build to keep up with demand and population growth. And these are called RENA goals, or Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And as you can see, we're doing a pretty good job at meeting our RENA goals for the above moderate income housing bracket. So that's affordable to people making that good salary we talked about earlier. But we're not building anywhere close enough housing for lower and moderate income people. And as housing costs have skyrocketed with production of affordable housing not being matched, working class residents and communities of color have been driven out of our urban core and pushed into the outer edges of our region, further away from job centers and further away from supportive services. And some residents have been displaced from the region altogether. So remember, when someone tells you that we just need to build more housing, it's important that we ask them, build more housing for whom? Again, we're not building enough housing at lower levels of affordability. And because we're not building enough housing that's affordable for lower and middle income people, they're leaving our communities while folks with higher incomes are coming in and staying in. So for every high income person that's coming into the Bay Area, a low income person is being pushed out at about a 1-to-1 ratio. So displacement really is driven by policy choices. And we may see this ratio of displacement continue to rise as the pandemic continues to progress. And the folks that are most rent burdened are in low wage jobs, and low wage jobs are getting hit the hardest by this crisis. And we can't build our way out to solve our problems, but it is true that we don't have enough homes for people. So what can we do? So as you can see, the affordability crisis we're living out today is the result of bad policy choices. The good news is that we can make a better set of choices moving forward. At TechEquity, we envision a world where a growing tech-driven economy creates opportunity for everyone, where tech sector employees and companies are engaged and active participants in making our communities better places to live. So we've identified structural changes that need to happen in order to achieve this vision, but it's clear that we won't be able to achieve this without the necessary policy change. So here's what we've identified in the housing world. I'm going to give a brief overview of each of these, but if you have any questions, again, I'll be happy to answer them at the end. So we need to take an above all approach when tackling our housing affordability crisis, and that starts with production, preservation, and protection. So production, we need to make sure that we're building more housing specifically at lower levels of affordability. And we can do this through zoning and permitting reform that brings down the cost of constructing housing by removing delays and lengthy administrative processes that are making it too expensive to build. Preservation. We need to make sure that we're providing more resources to subsidize and maintain and improve existing affordable housing. And last, protection. We need to protect existing tenants from displacement. So it's going to take a long time to build the housing that we need, but in the meantime, we need to protect existing tenants from displacement. Especially now, we need to be thinking about short and long-term solutions for preservation and protection because many of our neighbors are now more at risk than ever before. An economic downturn is also an ideal time to lean heavily into producing more affordable housing at the cost, as the cost of labor, housing, and land may decrease slightly within these current market conditions. We also need to make sure that we're all getting enough compensation and benefits to live a healthy and stable life. So we want to ensure that companies are doing their part to contribute to the communities they exist within, that people in the surrounding communities are able to access these jobs, and that these jobs are paying fair wages and benefits, regardless of the role you're in. So we were excited to see many tech companies step up and commit to continue paying their contingent workers at their offices as their offices closed during the pandemic. But we need to ensure that the same care and thoughtfulness goes into supporting those workers well beyond the pandemic. So we need to make sure that there are equitable on-ramps. There needs to be more access to good paying, high opportunity jobs. We need corporate responsibility. Companies need to be conscious of their impact in their communities and need to work with community leaders and organizations to ensure that their economic success is benefiting their neighbors as well. And finally, we need to make sure that all jobs are good jobs, that contractors and contingent workers are treated fairly. So once again, there are tons of ways for you to get involved with TechEquity. We host tons of educational events. We have monthly events if you check out our website. We also have house parties with our Director of Advocacy, Megan Abel. It's a chance for you to get together with your friends on a Zoom call and talk about either our organization, or we're also offering house parties to talk about what's going to be on the ballot this upcoming November in a couple of weeks. So if you're interested, we'll be sending out a follow-up email and you can just reply to me. If you're interested in advocacy, you can volunteer for one of the campaigns, which I'll be talking about next. And the final way you can engage with us is through engaging with the community. So we connect tech workers with non-tech community members through some of our volunteer opportunities. So if you're a designer or an engineer, you can volunteer for one of our civic tech projects where we're building digital tools that support renters or underserved communities and to get access to some of the information that they need. So this is how we work. We try to make it as easy as possible to plug in and also build community in the process as you're participating with us. So what can you do today? You can do three things right after you get off this call. You can tell a friend about our work. You can become a member of TechEquity for $10 a month or $100 a year, or you can take action on one of our campaigns, which I'll be talking about next. So the first campaign we have is the Yes on Prop 15 campaign, also known as Schools and Communities First. So local governments from public health departments to school districts are currently leading the fight against the pandemic. However, because of California's broken property tax system, they're doing it without all the necessary resources that we need. So our coalition, Schools and Communities First, had successfully submitted 1.7 million signatures earlier this year to qualify this initiative for the ballot this November. So if you have your ballot at home with you, it's Prop 15. And this will ensure that we bring back $12 billion to schools and communities by closing a corporate property tax loophole and making sure that corporations are paying their fair share in property taxes. So for this campaign, you can support us by volunteering to phone bank with us. We're currently hosting phone banks every Wednesday until the election. So we only have 2 more phone banks coming up. So it's an opportunity for you to join us and other tech workers and contact voters all throughout California to make sure that they vote yes on Prop 15 so we can get funding back to our schools and communities. So if you uh, want to sign up for that, once again, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with more information on how to register, and it's Wednesday during the evening. The next campaign we have is the Fair Chance at Housing campaign. So this campaign is all about helping remove barriers for formerly incarcerated people that have, so that they can have more access to housing after being released from prison. So we've successfully had ordinances passed in Oakland in partnership with the organization Just Cities and in Berkeley. And for this campaign, you can sign up or donate to support these efforts as they continue to expand protections throughout the entirety of Alameda County. And the last campaign we have is the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, which really highlights the work that we do at TechEquity and how we partner with community organizations and center the needs of people who are feeling the most pain of the affordability crisis more acutely than those of us in tech. So working alongside community partners, legislators, and relevant stakeholders, we were able to identify a new policy intervention that could protect more renters than any law before in California history. And the policy prevents tenants from arbitrary and unjust evictions by requiring landlords to have a good cause for evicting a tenant. And it also protects unfair rent increases and prevents price gouging by capping rent increases at no more than 10%. So as a result of our strong coalition, we were able to introduce a bill to the California legislature that was signed into law last October. I think we just had the anniversary like a couple of days ago. So the Tenant Protection Act now extends protections to 8 million California renters. But passing the law on its own wasn't enough for us at TechEquity. We also wanted to ensure that tenants knew their rights and could advocate for themselves. So we reached out to our TechEquity volunteers who donated their time and their skills to create a new website that would help tenants navigate their rights under this new law. So that website is live. It's called tenantprotections.org, and it's already been used by thousands of California renters. So if you're a renter or you know someone who's a renter and they want to know how this law would help protect them, once again, that's tenantprotections.org. So like I said before, you can do 3 things right after you get off this call. You can tell a friend about our work, you can take action on one of the campaigns I just talked about, or you can become a member of TechEquity. The Bay Area's tech economy, like I said, has only been working for some people. And while there are great opportunities for people to find success here, many people around us are struggling to make ends meet. As I mentioned before, I've grown up in the Bay Area my whole life, and I've seen firsthand how the unaffordability crisis paired with a tech boom has worked for some, but not for all. I have family who have pursued jobs within tech and found lots of success, but also friends and family who have come back from college and can't afford to move out of their parents' homes. So the Bay Area has the potential to be a ground where tech workers and community members are working side by side to bring equity to all. And through policy agendas, civic engagement, and active participation in our communities, we have an opportunity to create the neighborhoods that we always envisioned to live in. And we need to act now because our affordability crisis doesn't wait for anyone and impacts almost all aspects of our lives, from our housing to our families to our job. So in order to make the Bay Area a place that brings that opportunity and prosperity for all, everyone needs to pitch in. So at TechEquity, we're at it every day, serving as that conduit to bring forth policies and protect renters and build more housing and create more access to job opportunities. So you can join TechEquity as a member for $10 a month or $100 a year to bring your voice to the table and change to our community. And one more thing, the pandemic really has exposed how deep the cracks in our community and our economies run. And when cities are setting aside issues like fair labor conditions, it deepens inequity and leaves us vulnerable to things like recessions, future pandemics, and more. And because we've overlooked these issues in the Bay Area, it could set us back years in terms of recovery. So if you take one thing away from this conversation, we hope it's the realization that more equity within our neighborhoods and within our communities actually strengthens our economy and safeguards us from a future crisis. So we hope you'll join us in advocating for a future that works for everyone. We hope you join us as a supporter, as a member, as a volunteer in any way that you can, and continue engaging with us. So now is the time for questions. I'm sure that was quite a bit of information to absorb. As I mentioned, we'll be sending out the whole presentation, a recording of the webinar, and links to some of the things I talked about, but I'm happy to answer questions right now. Cool. So I'm not seeing any questions, but you can reply to the follow-up email I've said. I'll personally respond to your questions if something pops up later. So just keep an eye out for that. I want to thank everyone for your time. We hope you feel inspired to join our growing movement and hope to see you as a volunteer, as I said, as a member, or just on a future event that we host. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.